I mean, I'm the sort of person who never says never, right? There's always a kind of, let's just see what happens, because that's the way most of my life has unfolded. It has been pointless in my life to make plans because some fucking shit comes along, good or bad, that completely wipes the floor with everything. And whatever plans I fucking had are completely thrown out of the window.
Welcome to The Creative Asylum, a weekly podcast that digs deep into the minds of visionary creators of all stripes. Musicians, actors, filmmakers, writers, artists, cartoonists, and cultural disruptors. Here, we'll discuss perspectives of living life on your own terms. Life lessons that keep us grounded, insane, and sometimes pull us back from the edge. So, take a deep breath, loosen your grip on the bland and the boring. This is your weekly prescription for authentic living, creative clarity, and hopefully a little bit of cultural rebellion.
Side effects may include spontaneous joy, existential epiphanies, and an uncontrollable urge to do weird and beautiful things.
Hey friends, it's July 28th, 2026, and today's conversation in the Creative Asylum is with Miki Berenyi. She is one of the two guitar players and the primary singer in the 90s band Lush, one of my favorites from the 480 roster back in the day, 30 plus years ago. She's written this delightful, sometimes sad and dark, very open memoir that I thought was fantastic. It's called Fingers Crossed: How Music Saved Me from Success. After Lush broke up, they did a reunion in 2016. After that, she was in a band for a couple of records called Piroshka. And then after the release of her memoir, a band was pulled together called the Miki Berenyi Trio, or MB3, initially just as a support for the book, playing a few of the old Lush songs, but they have since turned into a full-blown band. They've written a whole bunch of original songs, and they released a single LP and are working on a new one, which to me is very exciting. We talk about this and many other things. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I had with Miki Berenyi. All right. Hello, Miki. How are you today?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm a bit exhausted. We are painting and decorating at home,
that's
so
fun.
it's complete chaos, and I'm covered in dust. And yeah.
Well, you can't tell, and you're wearing black, so it can't. The dust.
Oh, I quickly put this on.
I see. Okay. I was going to say dust usually shows up against black. Dust and animal fur.
Yeah, no, it's hiding a multitude of sins.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm usually covered in animal fur myself, so
okay.
Which is good. I love my dog. She's my daughter. So as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I just finished your memoir. I know in the acknowledgments you make some mention of, like, people encourage me to write a book, and I'm not a writer, and I'm going to disagree with you. I think you're a fantastic writer, and I think you have a real gift for language. So,
well, that's very kind.
Congratulations. And, also, I mean, you did something that I imagine is probably kind of scary, and that's that you just kind of put it all out there. You completely exposed everything about what was going on in your thoughts and your subconscious. And was that scary, or was that more of an epiphany, or like what was the writing process for you like?
It was an evolving thing because I wasn't, I didn't kind of write the book and then look for a publisher.
Right.
I was approached to write it, and then took quite a long time to think about it, just because I don't know, it just seemed like a really stupid idea to me. So then I was kind of faced with, once I sort of thought, okay, I mean, it was kind of COVID time, and I thought,
Right.
Yeah, okay, maybe this would be a good thing to do. So, but then I kind of needed quite a lot of guidance. So I didn't know what the hell I was doing. If I'm completely honest, it took me a while
Sure.
to, I think when I did a first few things, I had my publisher going, you're very nice about everyone. And I thought, okay, that's a criticism. Right? It's quite difficult. I do identify with someone being written about, and how damning that can be and how unfair it can be. you know? And I think, but at the same time, I had to balance that with like, well, you know, there's no point in me writing a book that is just a document of what happened
Mhm.
in a kind of very bland way. There aren't enough people who are interested in Lush, right, to want to read that. You know, you can do that if you're really, really famous because people just hang on every word, right? But in my position, it's like, well, the book has to have some sort of experience and thought to make it interesting, because no one really gives a shit. I mean, there'll be, okay, a tiny fraction of people will want to know what desk Robin Guthrie used or something, but really, and also this is the way I talk as
Right, right,
well.
right, which is something I actually appreciated, is that I felt like it was your voice, you know?
Yeah,
It was very British
it is British.
in a way that I
Yes.
really enjoyed. I'm a couple things I had to reread, like, "Okay, wait, that's a turn of phrase that I'm not familiar with. What does that mean? Okay, I understand."
Yeah, I'm sure there's a fair bit of that.
But I
Yeah.
enjoyed that, you know? I guess I'm probably, in that what you consider to be a small fraction of people who, are a fan of Lush. I mean, 4AD was then and is still to this day, I think, one of the greatest labels to ever have been, and I pretty much was into everything that came out on 480, but I was a big Lush fan, thanks in part to, I don't know if you're friends with Sherry Hood, if that name rings a
Yes,
bell?
yes, yeah, I remember Sherry. Yeah.
She's a
Yeah.
very dear friend of mine, and she worked at 480, and so she made sure I got everything. And, having had my own, record label back then as well in Seattle, a lot of 480 got played in the office because we got a lot of those records, so that was cool.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think 4AD had quite a kind of global reach at a
Yeah.
time when that was, I mean, it definitely punched above its weight. I mean, I found that even in, France and certain places in Europe as well, where they were kind of, really like, I mean, fans to the extent I can remember doing interviews where people were like, "So how does Ivo decide who gets to record which songs?" And I was like, "No, he's I know he's a bit of a Svengali, but no, he's not Phil Spector, okay?"
Right.
Like
But he seems to be somebody who clearly had some sort of vision.
Oh, totally, and I think he also had genuine enthusiasm. Like, he's quite an aesthete. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
not like he was trying to become famous or trying to become powerful, or those weren't the primary considerations. He did, work in a record shop and really loved records, and that was the driving force. And I always remember him talking about, I mean, he was very good friends at one point with Robin and Liz from the Cocktoes.
Mhm.
But, when he would describe just being in the room with her singing, and it was like, you could feel that he was just like, transported. So I think that was the sort of heart of 4AD, was that, real respect and kind of reverence for music.
And certainly her vocals were easy to feel a reverence toward,
Mm.
I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally.
I actually got to see, Cocteau Twins on their very first tour. I remember reading later that she was absolutely terrified and did not want to tour. That was never really part of the plan, and it was in San Francisco, and it must have been, I don't know, it must have been like '82 or something, and I just remember seeing her on stage, and, like, there's Robin, and there's this reel-to-reel duck, and she was absolutely terrified out of her mind, and it was obvious. And yet she sounded amazing, and
Yeah.
that was all the Garland's material, which is a very different kind of version of the band. Yeah, I mean, the other thing about 482, which I always loved, is, talking about, Ivo as an aesthete, which is not a word you would hear in America, is the visuals. I hate this word, but the label had such a brand identity visually, and I just always thought that kind of care to that aspect of the presentation of everything was always something that really excited me, just that there was a
Oh,
consistency across the board.
and it was integral to the label. I think when he had, I mean, Vaughan, initially with Nigel and then with, Chris. But, that kind of V23
Yeah,
artwork part was completely intertwined
yeah.
with the whole idea of 4AD. So that was never even a thing that you could separate. And I remember when, we did Scar and Mad Love and, so we did a bunch of like EPs and a mini album before we actually recorded a first kind of proper
Right.
album. And when we signed to Warner's as a kind of licensing deal, they kind of, put them all together to make Gala.
Right.
And Ivo, is still outraged by this, right? Because as far as he's concerned, well, first of all, he says it doesn't make sense. It's 3 different producers. It's blah, blah, blah. But he includes the visual aspect. It's like, no, Scar had this packaging. That's the whole record. That artwork goes with that record. Ditto with Mad Love, ditto with Sweetness and Light. And it kind of actually physically upset him.
I understand that. I mean, it makes sense to me. On the flip side, I understand why Warner's would want to bundle them and release it as a record.
Absolutely. But, I just think that was very, that's the way he thinks of it, that,
Sure.
is that kind of, the music has to be reflected in the packaging and the packaging needs as much care,
Yeah.
As the music. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so how did you feel about that? I mean, well, you talk about it in your book that it did feel sort of weird, but.
No, God. I mean, it was, I think what I was intrigued by is that I remember we signed at the kind of the same time as the Pale Saints. And Pale Saints, they were kind of, were infinitely more organized than we were. And very kind of, not professional. That makes them sound wanky. They weren't, but they'd put a lot of thought into things. So they already had like the artwork that they wanted for Sight of You. And it was very much their kind of idea. I found that astonishing, actually, because I was like, oh my God, you've got this team here. You've got one of the best teams in the whole of the music industry here. Why on earth would you kind of override that and think that you know better? I mean, fair play, you know what I mean? They had their vision, but we were we were like, oh my God, we're going to get like Vaughan Oliver to like make our record sleeve. Oh, bloody hell.
It seems like a dream, right?
Absolutely. Well, it was a dream. He was great.
Did you work with Vaughan Oliver, whose work I've always just been enamored with and fascinated by? Was it collaborative working with Vaughan Oliver, or was it more like, this is what we got and this is what we're going to do for you, or did it depend on the band?
He made it seem collaborative.
Okay.
I'm not sure that it ever is, you know, but I think what he does have is a lot of, respect for the artist. So that he would always be listening to the music and would relate it to the music.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how much of this is kind of, retrogressively justifying, right? But I think, he would explain it to you. He would explain his reasons. He would explain, this is reflecting this. I just think you're this kind of band. I love this about your band. And I've kind of, that's why there's a bit of humor in this. That's why there's this is here. This is why I'm doing this. And so, you felt like you were involved with, the decisions and the personality of what he was creating, It wasn't just a sort of like, listen, I know better than you. I've designed a sleeve and you should be fucking grateful. He would take the time, right, to kind of involve you and make you understand his vision. And then, it was quite dazzling, really, and very flattering.
Were you allowed any pushback, though, if there was something that did not sit with you?
I think there was one thing in the book that I put in, because I remember when it came to the Mad Love EP, he always had like a slightly smutty sense of humour. So a lot of our records had the kind of, willies and bums and sort of slightly, pink vaginal references or things. But on Mad Love, it was this kind of, it was almost like a kind of backgroundy blurred image and then these things etched into it. And I remember sort of going, oh, right, because it just looks like a big penis across it and some balls. And he does that thing where he looks at it and you go, my God, you've just got such a filthy mind.
Smutty.
That's a river. That's a river. And those are rocks. And I remember on the inner kind of label,
the penis is a river and the balls are rocks.
Exactly.
I can't believe you saw it any other way.
No shit. So I was like, okay, fine, very funny. And then in the inner sort of, in the middle of the kind of record, the label, I think there was a sort of what basically looked like a bum. bottom with sparks coming out of it, right? Like a fart, okay?
Right.
And I think that's the point when Emma said, like, okay, do you know what?
Enough.
No. No. But the funny thing is I still remember exactly how it looked, and that's interesting that stayed with me because it was actually quite beautiful. So he was probably right.
Yeah, I've just always wondered with his work if it's like this is what you get, and you should be happy because you're working with Von Oliver.
I don't know what other bands' experiences were. I mean, I've kind of since read about things where I've heard that other people weren't quite as enamored. Maybe that was earlier on in the labels kind of thing. So maybe at that stage, he wasn't so established and 4AD wasn't, and maybe people felt a bit like, why the hell is this guy? Who the fuck is he, and why is he designing our record sleeves?
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? But by the time we came along, I mean, he was, that was already in place and very revered, so we didn't have a problem with it at all.
And that studio's work was awfully influential because I remember even, in the 90s seeing so many labels beginning to design work that was clearly, a nod to or clearly influenced by, or maybe even trying to copy, V23. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I even notice with a lot of the Bella Union stuff, a lot of the visual aesthetic to me is reminiscent of a lot of the Von Oliver work as well.
I've not put out a record under my name that doesn't have a kind of V23 influence because Chris Big did all the Piroshka albums and he does the Miki Berenyi trio stuff. So
Right.
that just carries on because why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I ask him? You know what I mean?
He was part of that studio?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Well,
Got it.
so I think, by the time we signed to 4AD, it was Vaughan and Chris that were V23. And so,
Right.
Yeah.
With your current outfit, the Miki Berenyi 3, was it just an obvious thing that you were going to be on Bella Union? Did you ever approach 4AD about that, or was it just you already have a home with Bella Union and it just felt like the place to be?
I mean, to be honest, when we started Piroshka, we kind of kept it very, very quiet because we didn't really know if it was going to happen. I don't know, basically by the time we kind of recorded most of it on our own and had a kind of full album really kind of ready to go, it would have, it needed mixing and stuff, but, it was kind of done. And I actually just emailed Simon Raymond, who runs Bella Union, and I didn't think for a minute that he'd want to sign us, so I was actually just asking him for advice and said, "Look, do you know anyone who would be interested? I don't know who to email. We haven't got a manager. I don't know who to ask. I'm completely out of touch with the music industry. I haven't put a record out of my own for 20 odd years, so I don't, And then he just said, "Well, I'll put it out if you want."
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, bingo! Well, that was easy." Fuck.
Yeah.
No.
If only it was this easy for most bands, right? Of course, most bands maybe don't, I don't know. There was that thing that Albini said. I forget the exact numbers, but he said something like, half of all bands should break up, like, now. And I read that and I kind of laughed and I'm like, wow, that's kind of shitty thing to say. And then of course I said, and of course he's probably right. Because, most bands aren't necessarily bad. They're just completely forgettable, which is maybe even worse than being a shitty band, I think. How did Piroshka come to be? Because was that after the Lush reunion? Did you suddenly get this like, oh wow, I haven't played in a long time and this is really fun? Or
Oh, definitely. I think, the Lush reunion, I hadn't done music at all for 20 years.
Right.
And, went and got a normal job, kids, family. Just thought that was never going to happen again. I think Emma and Phil were kind of nudging towards wanting a reunion a few times. It never really worked out. And when that last time, I did spend a very long time thinking about it. The difficulty is as well that Chris died. It was very, I really just had to get the fuck away from all of it. And going back into it was stirring up quite a lot of those memories. And, it was all a bit emotional for me. Plus I had the kids and all that. Anyway, long story short is, yes, I did it. And the revelation I kind of had when I had to do it while I still had a job and I was taking unpaid leave and holidays.
Right.
But I did think, I was very nervous about going on stage again. I was very nervous about singing again on a record or writing lyrics. All of it was really tricky. But I did realize that it's really good fun, actually.
Right. Yeah.
I did think, God, I'm actually really enjoying this. Like, even just rehearsing is like great fun. And there was just sort of this part of me that I'd sort of pushed aside. And it was a bit like riding a bike. It all comes back and you think, God, I actually used to really love doing this. So after the kind of Lush thing sort of ended, Justin, who was kind of playing drums and had stood in for Chris, it was kind of his idea. If you want to do something else, I'd be up for it. And then, and then Mick Conroy, who played the last Lush gig in place of Phil on bass, then he said, well, I'd be up for it. And then, I said to Moose, who was just sitting here, I was going, well, you might as well fucking join. I mean, you're right here.
Yeah.
So
it was an easy pivot.
It was a learning curve in itself doing Piroshka, because I think it was the first time I'd done anything without the kind of Lush thing and, without Emma, all of that, again, like you say, without 4AD, without, I don't know, the whole world that went around Lush. So I didn't really know what I was doing. And I would argue that as much fun as I had in Piroshka, I think it was quite a good learning curve for a lot of things that I thought, okay, this doesn't really work, i.e. having a 6-piece band with a lot of equipment that makes it very cumbersome. And, there just isn't much money around. And, I think Bella Union kept sort of hinting at us going to America. And I thought, 6 of us, we're just going to lose an absolute fortune. You know what I mean? I'm not risking that on my bloody wage. You know what I mean? But I realised that if we were going to go forward after Piroshka, like the trio was, that would work. I would love to have a drummer. I would love to have a keyboard player and a second vocalist. But on a practical level, I think MB3 was, that had that practicality in mind of, look, if we're going to do this, I want to play live. I don't want to just, Piroshka hardly played live because it was so difficult to organise, even rehearsals. And I thought, if I do this, I want to put out records. I want to play live. I want to, we've got jobs. We can't take off on a 9-month tour, but I want to play regularly. I don't care if they're crappy little venues and there's only 120 people there. That's fucking fine.
Sometimes that's more fun because it's more intimate, right?
Well, and also because there's a slight liberation being my age. I mean, I'm going to be 60 next year.
Yeah. I'm going to be 65 in 2 months, so what the fuck?
Oh, well, happy birthday for 2 months' time.
Good Lord.
You're looking good on it. I don't know if you have special lighting, but you look good.
That's it. It's I've spent thousands of dollars on my lighting.
But yeah, it's not like I'm sitting here thinking, oh, if the band takes off, like in 10 years' time, we could be playing stadiums. Well, in 10 years' time, I'm probably going to be in a wheelchair. Okay. So that's not really, it kind of liberates you from having,
sure,
when you're very much in the moment and just thinking, oh, we've got a gig in August or something and everybody's in a good mood and, you're just writing songs and happy with that.
Well, you're certainly coming from a different perspective in your 20s versus your 50s, right?
I would argue that maybe I was always a bit like that, but because the machinery around you, I was grateful to that machinery around me, because I certainly couldn't have done it. It's not really my thing, it's the same with the book. It's the same, like people are like, wow, so you must have had this burning desire to become an author. And it's like, no, somebody asked me and I just thought I'd, make them happy and go along with it for a bit. And then actually it worked out quite well. Hey, who knew?
Once you were in the process of writing, what did that feel like after you decided I'm going to do this? I bring this up because I've been trying to write a book forever and I'm definitely my single biggest barrier is myself. But, in reading your book, I'm like, I think you have a real gift with words. Whether or not you think so or not, I don't know.
No, I was very pleased. I've been what we call here a sub-editor. I don't know if you call it a copy editor. I can't remember, but
call it copy editor, yeah.
I mean, nothing grand, just like consumer magazines and things. But I think kind of, working with words for 2 decades, you get a certain amount of confidence of what you can cut and what reads well. I think I found the process difficult because it's an autobiography and there were just a lot of kind of personal decisions about how to include people. And, I mean, I'll be honest, I had the reader in mind the whole time. Wasn't really like, I was very severe with my cuts. I would write a chat, at the beginning you think, oh, I must write about that because that will be really good. And then I'd write about it and I think, I mean, it's a bit meh. And then I just cut it, because it's not that I felt I need to get everything out there.
Right.
I need to tell this story. I thought I'm not going to tell it unless it reads well. It's funny. It's, hopefully, got enough drama in it to keep people interested.
Yeah.
I did want to do a lot of the characters justice. I mean, a lot of those people would disagree with me, but even writing about people who I found deeply problematic, I think on the whole, I would try and balance it with, I mean, I'll tell you what, I guess I think it's a bit like therapy. You write about, you dig up some memory and you think, fuck, that made me so angry, right? And you're going to get it down on paper. But you're also thinking, well, you did let this guy become your manager. You are culpable as well. You didn't have to, and all your friends told you it was a mistake, and everybody said he's a wanker, but you still fucking went along with it. So that is on you as well.
Sure.
And you're sort of all of those, and that applies to every relationship, every friendship, every disaster, the good stuff, the bad stuff, whatever. You have to take some sort of culpability for that rather than just pointing fingers all over the place. And that was kind of at the core, I think, of the book.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Except for maybe at the very end where you're like, fuck all the shoegaze stuff. For the most part, I thought that everything you said about pretty much every person in there was fair. Even when you were taking people down, you were also, describing it that this is my experience and also really trying to see the other side of maybe where people are coming from. I mean, especially with Emma, because I mean, that sounds like that was a complicated relationship, and you maybe wanted something from it that she was unable to give.
Yeah, I mean, I was very conscious. Yeah, it's very difficult. It was the stuff writing about Emma, and she uh, disagrees with 90% of whatever I've written in that book, so she's not happy. But
Okay.
we fell out after the end of Lush, and I haven't spoken to her since. But after the reunion, actually, and then it's that thing of like, well, I have to write about her because she's
Because how could you not?
well, obviously,
Yeah.
but also, it's quite difficult to write about someone when the relationship is already kind of destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was quite good to read. I'm a bit of a hoarder, and there's a lot of diaries and memorabilia and all that kind of stuff. And I did I was quite immersed in the past. I sort of would think about us being teenagers and would think very vividly about that time and the emotions that it stirs up, and look at diaries, things that I'd forgotten about, and would just think that was very funny. Or I mean, writing about Chris's death, I mean, I think there was about 4 or 5 days where Moose was coming home every night, every evening after work, and I'd be sitting there like in absolute tears. I was back there, I was back there, I was feeling it. And that's pretty much how I wrote the whole book. I think that's why I went on the absolute Britpop rant, because I just remembered how fucking angry I was at the time, how much I hated being involved, how it really was like just not fun
Right.
at that point, and that's not.
And how much had shifted in such a short period of time.
Yeah, I just felt, what the fuck? This is not where I want to be. And that's not just Britpop. It's not individual bands or anything. I mean, most people had an absolute fucking blast. But it was also because of, I think even if, Chris hadn't died, I don't know how long Lush would have lasted, because it was already we were worn out with it, really. And I think we weren't really getting on. So I think that last period with Love Life and touring it. I mean, funnily enough, the recording was great. We had a really good time. But I think by the time we were touring it, it was not great.
It's a brilliant record, I think. If you're enjoying this conversation, please make sure you hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video, leave a comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's the quickest way to grow our channel, and it's absolutely free. You can also subscribe to our other channels on social media. Check out our Instagram at Creative Asylum CA, that's the letter CA, or on TikTok at The Creative Asylum, that's all one word. Our website is thecapod.com, and our Facebook profile is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. All right, back to the episode. Coming back to playing with Emma in Lush for the reunion, did all of the old dynamics and old patterns just sort of right there reemerge? Kind of like, I don't know, like trying to get together with an ex that you already broke up with once?
Yeah, maybe a bit like that, or maybe more like a kind of family fallout, after a death in the family and people fall out over the will or something. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It was all quite bruising, really. And I mean, to be fair, right after Chris died, we did stay friends, but after that, we didn't speak for about 5 years, and the trigger was something so completely irrelevant that that's why I think it was something that was kind of destined to happen anyway. And then, barriers got broken down and we became friends again to an extent. But I think when we first did the Lush reunion, I went in quite, aware of our history, aware of how difficult that could be. And so I went in quite deliberately wanting to, not cause any problems,
Right.
like this is just going to be, it's going to be the band. Let's not let personal shit get involved or whatever. But, it's very difficult to do that when you are so webbed in with someone. There was a lot of stress. There was a lot of pressure during that time. I would argue that the pressure was even greater because, we didn't have great management. And I think maybe it's just, the nature of the personalities in the band.
Yeah.
Chris would have been the person who, he was so funny and so good humored that he was that kind of, role in Lush where he could just dissipate that kind of antagonism. And I think that's why a lot of things went wrong on that last tour, because poor old Chris his mind was clearly elsewhere. And without Chris this time as well, it was, I would argue that without him, it was, that kind of, emotional friction. Like there wasn't really anyone who had the authority and the stake to be able to calm those waters.
Right.
And yeah, the kind of inevitable happened. But at the beginning, happy days, I mean, everyone was really enthusiastic. But, shit happens, life happens, people's external problems start fucking invading.
Yeah.
And some people are much better at closing that stuff out. I'm not sure that we were.
How old were your kids at that point?
I think they were about maybe 15 and 12, something like that. Yeah. Maybe a little bit younger.
Yeah.
I think.
Did that make things very different for you? I mean, just different, not just difference in age, but just being a parent, being a grown up, whatever you want to call it, and now being on tour.
I mean, to be fair, Phil's had kids.
Yeah.
Emma had a daughter.
Okay.
I mean, Emma's daughter was probably only about 6 at the time, I think. So, there was a kind of shared element in that. I mean, to be fair to Phil, I don't think the kids were a problem for him because he had a wife who was very happy to look after the children. I think for Emma, it was quite difficult. She was, a single mother by then, although she was in touch with the father, but that caused a load of, oh my God, that was a whole other load of grief. And for me, it was that, Moose was going to have to hold the fort,
Sure.
And be here. And he's a musician as well. And also because of, to be fair, Moose thought it was a terrible idea from the start anyway. He was, do not do this. This is going to end in disaster. And Andy was right. Right. So I think he was quite, a bit reluctant and, wasn't particularly happy about it. But, completely took on the role of, doing the parenting while I was away. But it was difficult, and they miss their mum.
It should be, he should be able to pull that off, I think, right?
For sure. But, I think the worry of me being away
Yeah.
and, I think it was.
Well, how long were you gone for?
I mean, it's not just the time I was gone. I mean, the American tours took up probably 6 or 7 weeks all told. There was some European dates, there was
Right.
some, the British dates, but it's not really just the away. You're away mentally because the band has to come first. Once you're in there, it's a year and a half of everything revolves around the band.
And you're relearning the songs and building your calluses up on your fingers again,
And dealing with all the kind of day-to-day emotional, administrative, it's that thing of you're trying to have a nice evening and the phone goes and it's like, I'm going to have to deal with this. And then it's 3 hours at a laptop
Right.
sending messages and,
Was the original intent that it was going to be potentially a reunion that was going to have longer legs, that you were going to be an active band again, writing new material, releasing new records, or was it really more just to revisit the catalog of stuff that you'd previously released?
I think I was cautious,
Mhm.
not least because of Moose's, Cassandra-like warnings. Um, I think, also I had a job and, I was the main breadwinner in the family.
Right.
So when we first did that reunion, I was very much like, this is a year, right?
Mm.
I've got unpaid leave. I'm going to use all my holidays. We're not going to have a family holiday, nothing, right? Everything is going into the band. And I need that job at the end of it. Now, we had a manager who was full of the kind of, oh, you're going to leave that job by the end of the year. You're going to be getting this much money. And I thought, yeah, I've heard
I've
that
been
before,
here.
funny enough.
I've been here before.
Yes. So I was like, okay, well, we will see. Okay, but right now I'm saying a year. Now, if it had gone well, and if it had been, and we'd all had a lovely time, I still don't think I could have given up my job because there's no way that we would have made enough money. But let's just say that even if the money hadn't been that great, I would have maybe made efforts to fit it in. And who knows, that what would have happened, but that wasn't an option by the end. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm the sort of person who never says never, right? There's always a kind of, let's just see what happens because that's the way most of my life has unfolded. It has been pointless in my life to make plans because some fucking shit comes along, good or bad, that completely wipes the floor with everything. And whatever plans I fucking had are completely thrown out of the window. And that's from an early age, as you read in the book, right? Everything is on the whim of my parents who have, they're very interesting and funny and exciting people to be around, but plans are not part of their outlook on life. And when they decide to do something, you just have to pack up and go with them, right?
That was an aspect that I related to all too well, maybe not comfortably, but my own childhood was just largely chaos.
Okay.
When I
So
basically
did you move a lot and stuff?
I moved a lot. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
I actually dropped out of school in second grade and didn't go back
Wow.
until seventh. I was all up and down the West Coast with my hippie father.
Wow.
I think in 7 years we lived in 6 places, and 3 of those years was with no electricity, and about a year no running water.
Jesus.
I mean, interesting experiences, not your normal upbringing, certainly. And if I could change it, would I? Yeah, actually, I would. I would. I mean, one of the things I remember from just the constant change and the constant chaos was that it was incredibly difficult to make friends and reliably know that they would be there in a year from then. So in that process you tend to kind of put up barriers because you don't want to let yourself get too close to somebody because you're just going to be disappointed, and sad. So you build this tough exterior. At least I did.
Is that funny? Because I think I went quite the other way. I was like a real letter writer from like 7 years old. You know what I mean? If I left the school, there would be like 2 or 3 people that I would be like completely almost stalkerishly like letter writing to, and going, you know, and even at the age of like 11, I think, when I left Windsor, I would just get on the train on my own and go and visit old friends. Like, I was so desperate to keep in touch with everybody, you know what I mean? And I think that's been a constant in my life. I'm sort of, you know, quite clingy in that respect with friends.
But you also have friends that you've had for a long time.
Absolutely. I have friends
wonderful.
I was at school with, and, you know, so I do fight quite hard to maintain relationships, but, you know, it sorrows me when they end, because I always think I invest quite a lot in that, but I'm also aware that I can be a bit fucking much. So there's probably a reason people go, okay, enough, fuck off, right?
Do you still think that about yourself?
I mean, I think it's a side to me. You know, some people like it. Some people think that I'm a great loyal friend and they want that in their lives. And other people think it's a bit fucking much and they, you know, just go, leave me alone. You know, that's the way it works.
What are you going to do? Right. We are the people we are.
No shit.
I mean, you know, I think at the end of the day, all you really have to show for anything in life are the people that are dear to you. Your dear friends are the only people you have.
Completely.
When all's said and done. Like, when you go through the hardest shit, that's when you come to understand who your true friends are, invariably. Right.
And to be honest, even when great things happen to you, you know,
Yeah.
you realize who your great friends are, because they are as kind of excited and full of enjoyment for you.
They celebrate
because
with
they
you.
love you. Yeah, you know, and it's lovely having people along the way. I mean, it's funny. I'm listening to the audiobook of that Careless People. You know, the one about Facebook.
I don't.
And
tell me about it.
Oh, it's that Wynne Williams woman, like, who she's got a gagging order. So she appeared at the Hay Festival the other day, and she had to sit on stage and basically say nothing. It was like a protest thing. But the book is out. I'd really recommend it.
What's it called?
It's called Careless People.
Careless People. Okay. I will look it up.
It's her kind of time at Facebook, and it's great on audiobook as well. It's a really good listen. And oh my God, like, now there's a bunch of people who just don't give a fuck about friendship. You know what I mean? So ironic that
or the world.
Well, or the world, but I tell you, it explains everything. You listen to it and you go, yeah. Okay, I get it now. It all makes sense. Just because I know it's gossipy and whatever to find out about people's personal lives, but you do kind of think, you know, there are things about people that I think you find out that when other people, other friendships, that kind of thing aren't important to them in any way at all, it speaks volumes, I think.
People who treat other people as just steps along the way and who are expendable.
Yeah, and just don't seem to get, like, they'd almost be the sort of people, well, why? Why do you need to have friends? I mean, like, I guess they don't get any pleasure out of it as well.
That's baffling to me, that people would live a life so absent of what I consider to be the most important nutrient in life, you know?
Yeah.
Which is each other.
Absolutely.
The older I get, the more I begin to appreciate all the people. I mean, I appreciate them and I hold on to them, but sometimes I consider myself to be so deeply fortunate for all the wonderful people that I have known in my life, that I continue to know, you know, and in some cases that I meet even at this stage in life. It's that whole idea of finding your tribe and realizing that there's so many people in your tribe that maybe you'll never meet or that you still have yet to meet. For me, that's kind of what makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, completely. I mean, you know, you can't fucking be friends with everyone, you know, I get that.
No, quality is more important than quantity. Absolutely.
Yeah. But I think, I think, you know, friendship, camaraderie. I mean, I think that's why I've always, you know, it's funny when Justin was saying, oh, you know, you should do music after the Lush split. And he was, well, you could do a solo thing. And I was like, absolutely, I have no interest. And I think that's why even doing the book was quite hard, because it's very isolating, you know, and I think being on my own and like I said with the book, I had a really lovely publisher who would kind of, I could bounce stuff off and would send him stuff and get a lot of feedback. There's absolutely no way I could have done that book on my own. That idea of self-motivation, doing it in your own space, no feedback, that sense of purpose and that self-confidence. I don't have that. Okay. I need other people around me.
But maybe that's part of why it works, though, is
Yeah,
because
maybe.
you wrote it yourself, but you wrote it with input from the community that you're writing about, which is
Well,
pretty cool.
I did. I mean, I think I needed a publisher who could keep my mood up
Mhm.
is the main thing. I mean, I'm not saying I agreed with everything he said or, I mean, I remember very early on him saying, like, try not to edit it as you go along. And I was like,
Right.
okay. And of course, I absolutely edited it as I went along. There was absolutely no way as an editor I could just write that and think whatever. I had to I go back and I think, no, it's still bothering me.
Right.
And
Well, I mean, whatever process works, right?
yeah,
I think that's standard to say, just say, right, just vomit it on the page. Don't worry about it. And you can come back later to edit it. And if that
yeah.
works, but if it doesn't work, then okay.
There was a lot, I would kind of think of a chapter and then put it all out but then I would go, no, that's not right. I don't have to keep attacking it until it felt right. And I think there's that idea of finding your voice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes a while to seep in. What exactly are you trying to do here? Are you trying to be, create like a narrative? Are you trying to, I don't know, second guess what people will think is shocking or funny or interesting? Are you trying to think what you think is shocking or funny or interesting? Are you guilty of trying to make yourself seem too nice? I've read books where everyone else is a fucking arsehole
Everybody
except the
adores
bloke
you.
who wrote it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no
Sure.
kind of admission of any culpability. And, so all of those things are kind of webbed into the book. And I think people do, those are the sort of things you think about.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I do think I ended up somewhere where it was actually how I speak. And, because a lot of people were like, oh my God, writing about some of the childhood stuff, was that really difficult? And I was like, well, I mean, it was in terms of putting it in a readable format. But I said, I'll be honest with you, I talk about that shit all the time.
Yeah.
It's not like some deep, dark secret that I never mention.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, I've spent a life and the process of talking about those things throughout your life. One of those tools you have to sort of process it and make it so it's no longer a feeling of trauma inside of you. It's like, this happened and it was fucked up, but here I am now, and I've processed it as best I can. And sometimes being able to recognize the things that happened in your life and the ways that they've made you the way you are. I think sometimes just that recognition is part of the process of processing it.
Oh, completely. I mean, I think that's why it's a bit like therapy, you know what I mean? Writing an
Yeah.
autobiography. But I think it was, like I said, I think it was really helpful having the diaries, because I think there are things that you blunt them with time to suit who you are now.
Mhm.
And it fits in with how you see yourself having developed. And, and actually the raw kind of diary entries of a 15-year-old who is really not having a fucking good time,
Yeah.
Kind of did make me think, oh my God, I'd forgotten how dark some of the
Mhm.
times
Right.
were. So that was quite important, I
And
think.
you'd kept them all from.
Yes, like I say, I'm a massive hoarder.
That's amazing. I mean, I wonder if that made the process of writing a book easier too, because you had on some level been writing your whole life.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was always quite emotionally honest,
Mhm.
I mean, but funny enough, it was weird looking at the sort of very early diaries, like 10 to 12,
Wow.
where I did think, who are you writing for? This is actually not what is happening whatsoever, because I
Uh-huh.
know what's happening, because I know which school you were at. I know I have memories that are different from that, but there was almost a kind of wish fulfillment in the diaries but like things would leak through about, I think I was just trying to make myself be really chipper, but there would be these little windows into kind of, Dad arrived home yesterday and I managed to sleep all the way through the night. Now he's home, that would give me a little insight into
Right.
how anxious I must have been,
I got a lot of the anxiety for sure. That's something you could have easily not written about and never revealed. And yet it's so predominant in so much of the experiences that you talk about, which I think probably, I think a lot of people are anxious and especially in the world today. It's like we're living in an incredibly anxious world right now. So I had a question about, you're talking about Lush and how your songs were your songs and Emma's songs are Emma's songs. And they would basically come to the band pretty much fully realized. And I was wondering, both with Piroshka and MB3, if that process in both of those bands was similar, or if they were, or I guess are, a little more collaborative, or if the process of writing music is pretty much still the same for you.
No, it's more collaborative, but I'm not a good enough musician to just jam, right? So there's not a kind of like, hey, let's just go in a room and see what comes out after 3 hours. Nothing will come out.
Okay.
Apart from some fun conversations. So I think, there's 3 songwriters in the trio and we all write songs and they all start separately, and everyone writes quite differently. I think Ollie is probably the most open in that sometimes he will just have even a kind of backing track with a melody and then he'll go, I'm not wedded to any of this, do what the fuck you like. And then I might just chop it up and rearrange it and put a different melody on, and he doesn't seem to care, he's absolutely fine.
And when you're saying chop it up, you're talking about digitally.
Yeah. That I might go, to be honest, I think I've got an idea for melody, but I need the chorus to go around twice or whatever, or I need the intro to move. And it's very easy on a computer, these days. That's one of the advantages. Moose is much more he's much more sort of, he was the main songwriter in Moose as well. So he sticks to that. And then we would come in with kind of instrumentation and there are changes. I mean, he's actually become more collaborative having been in this band. And I'm the same, where I probably write in the same way that I would have liked to have written when I was in Lush. So I think that kind of my song, Emma's song thing worked very well for Emma. She would have a real vision for how she wanted the song to sound at the end. And, we would rehearse it, but she would be quite specific about what she wanted. And the real collaboration or the visualization of her doing that would be working with a producer. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I think I sometimes felt like the burden of having to write, I'd come up with like whatever I'd come up with, but then having to write the vocal, her guitar part, her backing vocal, the bass line, the whole thing, I mean, sometimes I would start to think, oh, I'm actually getting really sick of this song. Like, I wish there was someone else to kind of chime in here. And I think with Piroshka, there were a couple of songs that I wrote, and actually working with Mick Conroy in particular, I was like, wow, like he would come up with a bass line where I would be like, not in a million years would I have come up with that.
Right.
And that liberation of working with someone who's such a great musician and can actually add something that wouldn't have occurred to you, but is just amazing. I really got that feeling, particularly with him, I think, because I'd always had to write my own bass lines.
Interesting.
And sometimes that would be, just whatever. I mean, I did work very hard at them, and a lot of them, but it was like a real fucking grind, you know what I mean, to do it. But then again, there were songs that I started with the bass and the drums. I think there was always a part of me that felt the boys were a bit left out in Lush, so I would actually start trying to write a bass line that would be interesting to play and a drum pattern that would be and that would suit Chris. But I think with the trio, we haven't got any money, so there's no producer, right? So you have to fill that role yourself. You have to put between the 3 of you, you're doing that. So there's an inevitable kind of, and there's no kind of, overseer who gets the last word and says, well, now I'm going to vanish off with someone to mix this the way I want to.
Yeah.
It's all, everyone is kind of in it equally.
the consciousness of the band is collective, if not the actual writing process. I mean, that's kind of great. I think the recording sounds the recordings sound great. I think I read that MB3 came together because of the book and the idea that you could have some outfit to play some of the old Lush songs and as part of the book release, but it's turned into more.
Again, that thing of the outside coming in where no plan. Right? The plan was, let's just play 3 or 4 Lush songs.
Right.
Next thing you know, we get offered a support with the wedding present and the Gang of 4,
Wow.
Later in the year. And we're like, oh, I'm not fucking saying no to that.
Of
So
course.
then it's like, okay, shit, well, let's write some songs.
Yeah.
So it was actually, I don't know if we hadn't have had those offers. I don't know. Would we have carried on? I mean, maybe. But I think there's everything in my life has always involved like an opportunity coming up. And then you think, a door has opened. How do I get through that door and just fuck what happens afterwards? You know what I mean?
I think it's critical to always keep your eyes open for those doors as they open and be willing to walk through and see what happens. I mean, when my son was very young, that was kind of one of my main pieces of advice is you don't have to ever do any one thing in your life, is you can do a thing until you see something better that interests you. And, doors are going to open up. Like, see what's behind that door. You might find really interesting things.
For sure. How old is your son?
He's 37.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how old were you when he was born?
27.
Okay. That's reasonably mature.
I didn't feel that way at all, but
well, no, I'm sure you didn't feel it. So I'm just curious because the kind of very disruptive life that you had, were you kind of swearing blind that you were going to do the complete opposite with your own child?
Absolutely. And I probably overcompensated in some areas. I was probably too rigid in many ways. He would certainly say so, but that's a whole other story. So I like to end all of these with kind of a closing question. So we have a nice bow on everything. Actually, I have a couple questions. One, is the trio ongoing and are you working on new material? And is there a thought of releasing a new record?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Is the short answer. Yes.
I'm happy to hear that. I really like Triplo a lot. It's a beautiful record.
Yeah, we're working on stuff right now. So yeah.
Well, that's great. And then I guess my question to you, because you've done these various bands and here you are back making new music again. You've written a book. What do you think the thing is that always drove you creatively when you were younger, as opposed to the things that are driving you creatively now? Are they the same things? Are they different? Does it feel the same? Are you driven the same way that you used to be?
I think the primary sort of driver for myself personally is just actually enjoying the thing that I'm doing. I am quite fascinated by this whole AI conversation about creativity, which always seems to leave out the fact that there's a lot of people who actually like what they do, even if it takes them a long time, right? And I think that I wouldn't be doing this now if I didn't enjoy it. I'm not saying that, you can just breeze through these things. I mean, I think it can be tough going sometimes. I think the collaborative element is why I need people around me, because I would easily give up if the enjoyment stopped. And sometimes you need a kind of feeling of responsibility towards other people to get you through the humps and then, go, actually, I'm really glad I did that, but I don't think I could have done it on my own, that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of it is just really probably when I was a kid, it was probably too much time in my own bloody head and not settled enough to form enough friendships. And creativity is an absolute great thing to conquer loneliness. It just occupies you fully and you're in another world suddenly, and so I think that was probably the original reason I did it. And then I think once I was in a band, I realized that this was something you could do. In a way, you're still cut off from the rest of the world. It's still your thing. Nobody else really knows what you're doing or understands what you're doing or why you're doing it.
Right.
But it's still that thing of like, it's a way of having something outside of the shit that's going on out there that you can just forget about all that crap because you're in a rehearsal room with 2 mates and the rest of the world doesn't fucking matter at all at that point. You're just in the moment and, it's very satisfying and a lot of fun. And life affirming, I guess, you know.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Creative Asylum. A quick favor before you go. If you liked this conversation, please be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Tuesday at 10. You can find us on Instagram and on YouTube at Creative Asylum CA. That's Creative Asylum and the letters CA. Our website is thecapod.com. And our Facebook is the same, facebook.com/thecapod. Until next week, when we'll have a new conversation with another creative disruptor, stay creative in life and at work.